A sickly Mustang, abandoned and left to die in the unforgiving wilderness. One man's cruel decision that would spark an incredible chain of events. What happened next would not only change the fate of this magnificent creature, but also challenge everything we thought we knew about wild horses and their will to survive. The harsh Nevada sun beat down on the desert landscape as Tom Reynolds made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. His once prized Mustang, Shadow, stood weakly beside his truck, her coat dulled by illness and her spirit dimmed by suffering. The veterinary bills had mounted beyond his means, and in a moment of desperate weakness, he chose to abandon her in the wild rather than face the cost of euthanasia or continued treatment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now back to the story. As he drove away that fateful morning, leaving Shadow alone in the vast expanse of the high desert, he convinced himself that nature would take its course quickly. Perhaps it would be more merciful than watching her waste away in his modest stable. The image of her in his rear-view mirror, growing smaller and more distant, would become a recurring nightmare in the months to come. What Tom couldn't know was that Shadow's story was far from over. In fact, it was about to take a turn that would defy all expectations and challenge our understanding of these magnificent creatures. The Mustang's journey would soon catch the attention of wildlife observers, veterinarians, and horse behaviorists across the country. The first to notice Shadow was Maria Blackwood, a wildlife photographer who had been documenting the local wild horse herds for over a decade. Through her long-range lens, she spotted the unusual sight of a clearly domesticated horse attempting to integrate with a wild band. What caught her attention wasn't just Shadow's obvious domestic background, but the way the wild horses seemed to respond to her presence. Instead of the typical wariness or aggression that wild herds often showed toward domestic horses, this group appeared to be actively supporting Shadow. Maria observed as two mares flanked the sick horse, guiding her toward water sources and the best grazing spots. It was behavior that went against everything she had documented in her years of observation. As days turned into weeks, Maria continued to photograph and document Shadow's integration into the wild herd. The most remarkable aspect wasn't just that she survived, it was how she began to thrive. The wild horses seemed to possess an innate knowledge of which desert plants could help their sick companion. They led her to specific patches of herbs and minerals that local indigenous peoples had long known for their medicinal properties. The transformation began slowly but steadily. Shadow's coat, once dull and lifeless, began to regain its luster. Her movements, initially weak and uncertain, grew stronger and more confident. The wild herd had not just accepted her, they had become her healers, her family, her salvation. Word of this extraordinary situation began to spread through the wildlife community. Researchers from nearby universities started to take notice, setting up observation posts to document this unprecedented behavior. What they were witnessing wasn't just a story of survival, it was a revelation about the sophisticated social structures and healing knowledge of wild horse herds. As Shadow's story began to circulate among local horse enthusiasts, it eventually reached Tom Reynolds. The guilt that had been eating at him turned to amazement as he learned of his former horse's fate. The animal he had abandoned to die had instead found a new life, one that would help reshape our understanding of wild horse communities and their capabilities. This first chapter in Shadow's remarkable journey would prove to be just the beginning. The lessons learned from her integration into the wild herd would challenge conventional wisdom about both domestic and wild horses, leading to new insights into their intelligence, social structures, and their capacity for healing. Her story would become a testament to the resilience of life and the deep, often mysterious bonds between animals. a story that would continue to unfold in ways no one could have predicted. As news of Shadow's remarkable transformation spread through the scientific community, Dr. Elena Martinez, a leading equine behaviorist from UC Davis, arrived at the Nevada desert. Her presence would mark the beginning of one of the most comprehensive studies ever conducted on wild horse social behavior and their mysterious healing practices. Setting up a sophisticated observation post at a careful distance from the herd, Dr. Martinez and her team began documenting every interaction between Shadow and her new family. What they discovered would challenge decades of established research. The wild horses weren't just leading Shadow to medicinal plants. They were demonstrating a complex system of care that seemed almost ritualistic in nature. The team observed as the herd's lead mare, whom they named Sierra, would guide Shadow to specific locations at particular times of day. During the scorching afternoon hours, Sierra would lead the group to a hidden canyon where thermal winds provided natural cooling. At dawn, they would visit alkaline soil deposits that the horses would lick, a behavior that corresponded with traditional livestock mineral supplementation. Most intriguing was the discovery of what Dr. Martinez termed healing circles. During these events, which typically occurred at dusk, the herd would form a protective ring around Shadow, with younger horses running circles around the group. The behavior coincided with significant improvements in Shadow's condition, though its exact purpose remained a mystery that would baffle researchers for months to come. The local Native American community, particularly the elders of the Northern Paiute tribe, took notice of the research. Jimmy Red Cloud, a tribal elder, approached Dr. Martinez with invaluable insights passed down through generations. His people had long observed similar behaviors in wild herds, incorporating these observations into their own healing traditions. According to Red Cloud, the horses' healing circles were more than just a protective formation. They were a way of generating energy and sharing strength with their weakened companion. This aligned with thermal imaging data that showed increased body heat generation during these gatherings, though Western scientific frameworks struggled to fully explain the phenomenon. Meanwhile, Shadow's physical transformation continued to astound observers. The infection that had once threatened her life was clearing up without any human intervention. Her coat, now gleaming in the desert sun, had developed the distinctive dappled patterns seen in wild mustangs, a change that shouldn't have been possible according to conventional understanding of horse genetics. The documentation of Shadow's recovery was meticulous. Dr. Martinez's team collected blood samples from areas where Shadow had grazed, analyzing the plants and minerals she consumed under the herd's guidance. The results revealed a sophisticated, natural pharmacy, with the horses selecting plants containing compounds similar to those found in modern antibiotics and anti-inflammatory medications. But perhaps the most significant development was Shadow's changing behavior. The once domesticated horse had begun to move with the confident grace of her wild companions. She learned their warning systems, their methods of communication, and their complex social hierarchies. She wasn't just surviving in the wild, she was becoming wild herself, while retaining a unique position as a bridge between two worlds. As the second month of observation drew to a close, Dr. Martinez realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in the field of equine research. Shadow's story wasn't just about survival or adaptation. It was revealing an ancient wisdom, preserved in wild herds, a wisdom that modern science was only beginning to understand. The implications of these discoveries would reach far beyond this single case, promising to revolutionize our approach to both wild and domestic horse care. The story of Shadow and the healing herd had begun to attract attention far beyond the scientific community. As viral videos of the healing circles spread across social media, The remote Nevada desert became an unexpected pilgrimage site for horse enthusiasts, alternative medicine practitioners, and the simply curious. This sudden influx of human interest would present both new challenges and unexpected revelations. Dr. Martinez's team faced the delicate task of balancing research needs with protecting the herd from disruption. They established a strict perimeter, but even at a distance, the increased human presence had a noticeable effect. The herd's behavior began to shift, with their healing ceremonies now taking place primarily at night, visible only through infrared. Cameras that captured an even more remarkable phenomenon. The nighttime recordings revealed that during these nocturnal healing circles, the horses' movements created distinct patterns in the desert sand. When viewed from above, these patterns bore striking similarities to ancient petroglyphs found in nearby cave systems, patterns that Jimmy Red Cloud identified as traditional healing symbols of his people. The implications of this connection between equine behavior and indigenous knowledge would spark heated debates in archaeological circles. As fall approached, bringing cooler temperatures to the desert, Shadow's transformation reached a crucial phase. The formerly domestic horse had developed an unexpected leadership role within the herd. Other sick or injured wild horses from neighboring bands began to seek out Shadow's group as if drawn to their healing knowledge. Shadow, having experienced both domestic care and wild healing, seemed to serve as a bridge between these struggling animals and the healing herd. This phenomenon caught the attention of Dr. Sarah Chen, a veterinary researcher specializing in animal behavior. Her analysis suggested that Shadow had become something unprecedented, a healing facilitator who could identify ailments in other horses and guide them to specific treatments. She documented cases where Shadow would lead injured horses to particular mineral deposits or guide them through specific movements that aided their recovery. The implications of these observations extended beyond wild horse behavior. Several veterinary schools began incorporating findings from the Shadow study into their research on natural healing methods. The discovery that horses could not only self-medicate but teach these behaviors to others challenged fundamental assumptions about animal intelligence and medical knowledge. Meanwhile, Tom Reynolds, Shadow's former owner, had been following the developments from afar, his initial guilt transforming into a complex mix of emotions. When he finally gathered the courage to visit the observation site, his presence triggered an unexpected reaction. Shadow, now fully integrated into the wild, acknowledged him from a distance but showed no desire to return to domestic life. Instead, she performed a healing circle ritual in full view of her former owner, an event that researchers interpreted as both a demonstration of her new role and perhaps a form of forgiveness. This interaction sparked a profound discussion about the relationship between humans and horses. Had domestication, despite its benefits, somehow suppressed ancient knowledge that horses carried in their genetic memory? The question became central to a growing movement advocating for more natural approaches to equine care. The research team expanded their study to include other wild herds across the American West, discovering that while healing circles were rare, they weren't unique to Shadow's group. Similar behaviors had been observed, but never properly documented, dismissed as mere curiosities rather than the sophisticated healing practices they now appeared to be. As winter approached, bringing new challenges to desert survival, Shadow's story had evolved far beyond a simple tale of abandonment and survival. She had become a symbol of nature's resilience, a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern science, and living proof that there was still much to learn from the creatures we thought we knew so well. The next phase of research would delve even deeper into the mysteries of equine intelligence and their untapped potential for healing. The winter months brought unexpected challenges and revelations to the research team studying Shadow's herd. As temperatures dropped in the Nevada desert, Dr. Martinez and her colleagues witnessed something extraordinary. The wild horses began preparing Shadow for her first winter in the wild, using methods that would revolutionize our understanding of equine adaptation. The herd's preparation ritual began with what the researchers termed coat training. Older mares would systematically guide Shadow to roll in specific areas of the desert, exposing her to various natural materials that would help thicken and weatherproof her coat. This behavior had never been documented before. Domestic horses typically required human intervention to prepare for harsh weather conditions. More remarkably, the herd introduced Shadow to a complex system of seasonal migration that had been passed down through generations. Using thermal imaging and GPS tracking, the research team observed as the horses followed ancient pathways to lower elevations, paths that perfectly aligned with geological surveys, showing optimal wind protection and food availability. These routes, it turned out, had been used by wild horses for centuries, information encoded in their collective memory. Dr. James Wilson, a climatologist who joined the research team, made a startling discovery. The horses' migration patterns showed an uncanny correlation with upcoming weather systems, suggesting they possessed an advanced ability to predict weather changes weeks in advance. Shadow, under the herd's guidance, was learning to read these natural signals, from subtle changes in air pressure to variations in plant behavior. The herd's winter survival strategies proved particularly fascinating to military survival experts who began consulting with the research team. The horses' ability to locate water sources beneath the desert surface, their methods of finding shelter during storms, and their sophisticated social organization during harsh conditions offered valuable insights for wilderness survival training. As winter intensified, Shadow's integration into the herd faced its greatest test. A severe storm system threatened the region, bringing temperatures well below freezing. The research team watched anxiously as the herd implemented what appeared to be a coordinated survival strategy. They formed tight, circular formations, rotating positions to share body heat, with younger members protected at the center. Shadow's role during this crisis proved crucial. Her experience with human structures led her to guide the herd to an abandoned mining outcrop during the worst of the storm, a choice that demonstrated a remarkable synthesis of her domestic knowledge and wild instincts. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This hybrid wisdom would later become a focal point for researchers studying animal intelligence and adaptive behavior. The storm also revealed another extraordinary aspect of the herd's capabilities. In the aftermath, when food became scarce, the horses demonstrated sophisticated resource-sharing behaviors. The stronger members of the herd, including Shadow, would break through ice and snow to access vegetation, then step aside to allow weaker members to feed. This level of cooperative behavior challenged existing theories about competition and survival in wild animal populations. Dr. Martinez's team documented how Shadow's previous domestication actually contributed to the herd's survival strategies. Her familiarity with human-made structures and materials allowed the group to safely navigate areas other wild horses typically avoided, expanding their winter foraging range. This adaptation demonstrated how the integration of domestic and wild knowledge could enhance survival capabilities. The winter observations attracted the attention of evolutionary biologists who began to theorize about the implications of Shadow's case. How much of wild horse behavior was instinctive and how much was learned? Could domestic horses, under the right circumstances, recover ancient survival knowledge thought to be lost through generations of selective breeding. Shadow's successful adaptation suggested that these primitive survival mechanisms remained dormant rather than extinct in domestic horses, raising intriguing questions about genetic memory and behavioral plasticity. As winter gave way to spring, Shadow's story took an unexpected turn that would challenge everything the research team thought they knew about wild horse societies. The arrival of breeding season brought new dynamics to the herd, and Shadow's role would evolve in ways no one had anticipated. Dr. Martinez and her team were stunned to observe that Shadow, now fully recovered and integrated into the wild, had become a crucial figure in the herd's breeding season rituals. Unlike typical mare behavior, she seemed to take on a unique role as what researchers termed a maternal mentor to first-time mothers in the group. This previously undocumented behavior suggested levels of social sophistication that went far beyond basic survival instincts. The most remarkable aspect of Shadow's new role emerged during the birth of the season's first foal. The research team watched in amazement as she positioned herself as a guardian, keeping other curious mares at a distance while simultaneously demonstrating to the inexperienced mother how to position herself for delivery. Her actions showed an extraordinary synthesis of learned domestic horse behaviors and wild instincts. Dr. Rebecca Thompson, a specialist in animal cognition who joined the observation team, noted something even more fascinating. Shadow appeared to be teaching other mares specific breathing patterns during labor, techniques that bore striking similarities to those used by professional horse breeders to calm nervous mares. This transfer of domestic knowledge to wild horses was unprecedented and raised intriguing questions about the potential for cross-cultural learning in equine societies. The spring also brought an unexpected visitor to the research site, a retired rodeo horse that had escaped from a nearby ranch. The research team watched with intense interest as Shadow's herd encountered this new domestic horse. Instead of rejecting the newcomer, Shadow stepped into a familiar role, beginning the same integration process that had saved her own life a year earlier. This cycle of teaching and healing suggested that the herd had developed a replicable system for rehabilitating domestic horses. This development caught the attention of equine rehabilitation specialists worldwide. The possibility that wild herds could serve as natural rehabilitation centers for traumatized or injured domestic horses opened up new avenues for therapeutic research. Shadow's herd was demonstrating that the gap between domestic and wild horses might not be as unbridgeable as previously thought. The observation team expanded their study to include detailed analysis of the sounds and movements used during these teaching sessions. They discovered that Shadow had developed a unique vocabulary of vocalizations, a hybrid language that combined traditional wild horse communications with sounds commonly used in domestic settings. This linguistic adaptation proved particularly effective in helping newly integrated domestic horses understand and respond to the herd's guidance. As spring progressed, the research team documented how Shadow's influence extended beyond her immediate herd. Other wild bands began to mimic her herd's healing circles and integration techniques. This spread of knowledge through wild populations suggested that horses possessed far greater capacity for cultural learning and innovation than previously recognized. Dr. Martinez's team also observed an unexpected development in Shadow's relationship with the local environment. She began leading her herd in what appeared to be deliberate ecosystem maintenance behaviors, selective grazing patterns that promoted plant diversity and soil health. These activities demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of environmental stewardship that challenged conventional views about grazing animals' impact on their habitat. The implications of these spring observations reached beyond wildlife biology into the realm of conservation science. Shadow's herd was demonstrating that wild horses could play a crucial role in maintaining healthy ecosystems while simultaneously preserving and transmitting crucial survival knowledge across both wild and domestic horse populations. This revelation would soon spark intense discussions about the future of wild horse management and conservation strategies. The arrival of early summer brought an unprecedented challenge that would test Shadow and her herd in ways no one could have predicted. A severe drought hit the Nevada region, transforming the already harsh desert landscape into an even more unforgiving environment. This crisis would reveal yet another layer of the wild horse's extraordinary capabilities and Shadow's unique contribution to their survival. Dr. Martinez's team watched in amazement as Shadow began leading the herd in what they initially thought were random wanderings. However, detailed GPS tracking revealed a purposeful pattern. She was leading them to ancient water sources that weren't marked on any modern maps. These hidden springs and underground water pockets had been known to indigenous peoples centuries ago, but had been lost to modern documentation. The discovery prompted a collaboration between geologists and archaeologists, who found that Shadow's water-finding routes perfectly aligned with historical Native American horse trails. Dr. Amanda White, a geologist specializing in desert water systems, was particularly intrigued by Shadow's ability to detect underground water sources. Using ground-penetrating radar, her team confirmed that the horses were somehow sensing water tables deep beneath the surface. More remarkably, Shadow had begun teaching this water-finding ability to other horses. The research team documented as she would lead younger horses to dry riverbeds, showing them how to dig precisely in spots where water was closest to the surface. This knowledge transfer wasn't just helping her immediate herd. Other wild bands began following their water-finding patterns, creating a ripple effect of survival knowledge throughout the region's horse populations. The drought also revealed another fascinating aspect of Shadow's influence on the herd. Under her guidance, the horses developed a sophisticated rotation system for water access, ensuring that every member of the group, from the strongest to the weakest, received adequate hydration. This level of resource management challenged long-held assumptions about hierarchical structures in wild horse societies. Jimmy Red Cloud, who continued to consult with the research team, noted that Shadow's water-finding behavior matched ancient stories in his tribe's oral tradition. These tales spoke of special horses who could smell the water spirits beneath the earth. What was once dismissed as folklore was now being validated through scientific observation, bridging the gap between traditional knowledge and modern research. The drought crisis also attracted the attention of climate scientists studying animal adaptation to extreme weather events. Shadow's herd demonstrated remarkable adaptability, adjusting their foraging patterns and daily movements to conserve energy and maximize access to dwindling resources. Their strategies began to inform new approaches to wildlife conservation in drought-affected regions. Perhaps the most significant development came when Shadow's herd encountered a group of feral horses suffering from severe dehydration. Instead of competing for resources, as conventional wildlife theory might predict, the herd integrated these struggling animals into their water-finding routine. This altruistic behavior suggested that wild horses possessed far more complex social cooperation abilities than previously recognized. Dr. Martinez's team documented how Shadow's domestic background actually enhanced the herd's drought survival strategies. Her experience with human water sources meant she could recognize certain artificial structures that might collect water, such as old mining equipment or abandoned ranching installations. This hybrid knowledge proved crucial in supplementing the herd's natural water-finding abilities. As the drought persisted, Shadow's story began to influence policy discussions about wild horse management. Her herd's demonstration of sophisticated Resource management and environmental adaptation challenged traditional views about wild horse populations being a burden on desert ecosystems. Instead, they were revealing themselves to be crucial players in maintaining desert biodiversity and water system knowledge. As the drought continued to grip the Nevada desert, a new dimension of Shadow's influence emerged through an unexpected encounter with human development. A major solar farm project was slated for construction near the herd's territory, threatening to disrupt their carefully mapped water sources and migration routes. This conflict would reveal yet another extraordinary aspect of wild horse adaptation and Shadow's unique role in navigating the intersection of natural and human worlds. Dr. Martinez's team observed with fascination as Shadow began leading the herd in what appeared to be strategic responses to the construction activity. Rather than fleeing from the area entirely, as other wild herds had done, Shadow's group adapted their movements to create new routes that minimized contact with human activity while maintaining access to crucial resources. This behavioral adaptation demonstrated an unprecedented level of problem-solving ability. The construction company's environmental impact team, initially skeptical of the horse's capacity to adapt, found themselves documenting remarkable instances of equine intelligence. Shadow's herd had begun timing their water access to coincide with the construction crew's off hours, showing a sophisticated understanding of human schedules. They also developed new pathways that utilized the shade of solar panels during the intense heat of midday, a behavior that would later influence the design of wildlife corridors in development projects. Dr. Lisa Chen, an environmental psychologist, studying animal responses to human development, noted something even more remarkable. Shadow appeared to be actively teaching the herd how to interpret human activities and structures. Having once been domesticated, she understood that certain human behaviors signaled different levels of threat. This knowledge proved invaluable in helping the wild horses coexist with the increasing human presence in their territory. The most significant breakthrough came when researchers discovered that the herd's new movement patterns were actually more efficient than their previous routes. Using satellite tracking and energy expenditure calculations, they found that Shadow had led the group to develop shortcuts that reduced their daily travel distance by nearly 30%. This adaptation wasn't just about avoiding humans. It was about optimizing their survival strategies in response to changing circumstances. The solar farm project managers, impressed by the horses' adaptability, began consulting with Dr. Martinez's team to modify their construction plans. Shadow's herd had effectively demonstrated that with proper understanding and accommodation, wild horses could adapt to human development without losing their essential wild behaviors. This revelation would later influence environmental impact assessments for development projects across the American West. Meanwhile, Jimmy Red Cloud brought forward ancient petroglyphs from nearby cave systems that seemed to depict similar horse adaptation stories. The images showed horses leading their herds around human settlements while maintaining their wild nature. This historical evidence suggested that the ability to adapt to human expansion while preserving wild wisdom was an ancient trait of Mustang herds, one that Shadow had managed to reawaken. The research team also documented how Shadow's hybrid knowledge continued to evolve. She began teaching the herd to use man-made structures to their advantage, utilizing drainage culverts as sheltered passageways and finding water in construction site retention ponds. Yet she simultaneously maintained the herd's wild integrity, ensuring they never became dependent on human sources for survival. Perhaps most intriguingly, Shadow's herd began exhibiting what researchers termed technological observation behavior. The horses would carefully watch the construction crew's water trucks and follow the water spray patterns to find newly dampened soil for grazing. This level of observational learning and adaptation suggested cognitive abilities far beyond what had previously been attributed to wild horses. As summer progressed, the success of Shadow's herd in navigating these new challenges led to broader discussions about wildlife adaptation in the face of human expansion. Their story was becoming a powerful example of how wildlife could adapt to development without losing their essential wild nature, challenging the notion that wilderness and human activity were inherently incompatible. As late summer approached, an unexpected discovery would thrust Shadow and her herd into the center of a groundbreaking study about animal communication. Dr. Martinez's team, using advanced audio recording equipment, began detecting patterns in the herd's vocalizations that defied conventional understanding of equine communication. The breakthrough came when Dr. Rachel Wong, a specialist in animal linguistics, identified what appeared to be a sophisticated system of calls unique to Shadow's herd. These vocalizations combined traditional wild horse sounds with modified versions of domestic horse communications, creating what amounted to a new dialect. More remarkably, this hybrid language was being adopted by other wild herds in the region, spreading like a linguistic innovation through the horse populations. The research team documented over 50 distinct vocalizations, each corresponding to specific situations or needs. Shadow's influence was particularly evident in calls related to human activity. She had developed specific alerts for different types of vehicles, construction equipment, and human behaviors. These warnings were more nuanced than typical equine danger signals, allowing the herd to distinguish between genuine threats and harmless human activities. Most fascinating was the discovery of what researchers termed teaching sequences, repeated patterns of sounds that Shadow used when introducing new members to the herd. These sequences had a clear educational purpose, often accompanied by demonstrations of specific behaviors. Dr. Wong's analysis revealed these teaching calls contained elements of both domestic and wild horse vocalizations, suggesting Shadow had created a bridge between two different worlds of equine communication. The implications of these findings attracted the attention of Dr. Marcus Chen, a cognitive scientist specializing in animal intelligence. His team began mapping the neural responses of herd members during these communication sessions, using portable EEG equipment designed for wild animals. The results were startling. The horse's brain activity patterns during these exchanges resembled those observed in primates during complex problem-solving tasks. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this new communication system was its apparent ability to convey abstract concepts. Shadow's herd had developed calls that seemed to reference future events or distant locations, suggesting a capacity for planning and spatial awareness that challenged existing theories about equine cognitive abilities. They could effectively communicate about water sources they hadn't visited in months, or alert the herd to seasonal changes before they occurred. The research team was particularly intrigued by Shadow's use of what they termed memory calls, vocalizations that appeared to help transfer knowledge from experienced herd members to younger ones. These calls were often accompanied by specific body language and were frequently used during the herd's healing circles, suggesting a complex system of knowledge transmission that combined auditory and visual elements. Jimmy Red Cloud provided valuable insight when he recognized similarities between some of Shadow's teaching calls and traditional Native American horse calling techniques. This connection suggested that domestic horses might have retained ancient communication abilities throughout their domestication, abilities that Shadow had managed to reactivate through her unique position between wild and domestic worlds. The study's findings began to influence other fields of animal behavior research. Shadow's herd demonstrated that animal communication could evolve rapidly in response to new challenges, and that different populations could share and adopt these innovations. This challenged the traditional view of animal communication as being relatively fixed within species. As news of these discoveries spread through the scientific community, Shadow's story was no longer just about survival or adaptation. It was revealing fundamental truths about the capacity for cultural and linguistic evolution in non-human species. Her herd had become a living laboratory for studying how animals could create new ways of sharing information and adapting to a changing world. The arrival of early fall brought an unprecedented event that would challenge researchers' understanding of wild horse society. A severe respiratory illness began spreading through neighboring herds, threatening the delicate balance of the desert ecosystem. Shadow's response to this crisis would reveal an extraordinary system of community care that transcended traditional herd boundaries. Dr. Martinez and her team watched in amazement as Shadow's herd began actively seeking out sick horses from other bands. Rather than avoiding the ill animals, as wild herds typically would, Shadow led her group in what appeared to be organized rescue missions. Using their newly documented communication system, they would guide weakened horses to specific locations where medicinal plants grew in abundance. The most remarkable aspect of this behavior was the systematic way Shadow's herd approached healing. Dr. Catherine Morris, a veterinary pathologist who joined the research team, identified distinct stages in their treatment protocol. The sick horses would first be led to particular mineral deposits, then to specific plants known for their antimicrobial properties, and finally integrated into the healing circles that had become the herd's signature therapy. Through thermal imaging and biomedical sensors, the research team documented physiological changes in sick horses during these healing sessions. The combination of specific movements, carefully timed breathing patterns, and strategic use of natural remedies showed remarkable effectiveness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now back to the story. Blood samples taken from recovering horses revealed increased immune responses and decreased inflammation markers, suggesting the treatments had measurable biological impacts. Jimmy Red Cloud's knowledge once again proved invaluable as he identified many of the plants being used by the horses as traditional medicines in Native American healing practices. The horses were selecting plants that contained compounds similar to those found in modern respiratory medications, demonstrating an innate understanding of natural pharmacy that had been preserved through generations of wild horse wisdom. The crisis also revealed another layer of Shadow's influence on wild horse society. Her herd developed what researchers termed a wellness monitoring system. Healthy horses would be assigned to watch over recovering ones, maintaining specific distances and positions that optimized air circulation while minimizing the risk of disease spread. This level of organized healthcare had never been documented in wild animal populations. Dr. Martinez's team was particularly intrigued by Shadow's role in this process. She appeared to be teaching other horses not just how to find medicinal plants, but how to assess the severity of illness and adjust treatment accordingly. Her domestic background seemed to give her a unique perspective on identifying different stages of respiratory distress, knowledge she was now passing on to her wild companions. The success of these healing interventions began attracting attention from wildlife veterinarians worldwide. The horses' natural treatment protocols were showing effectiveness rates comparable to some conventional veterinary treatments, raising intriguing questions about the potential for integrating wild horse wisdom into modern animal healthcare practices. Perhaps most significantly, the response to this health crisis demonstrated the emergence of a larger inter-herd social network. Shadow's healing knowledge was being actively shared and adopted by other bands, creating what amounted to a regional healthcare system among wild horses. This level of cooperation between different herds challenged fundamental assumptions about competition and territory in wild animal populations. As fall progressed and the respiratory illness began to wane, the implications of what researchers had witnessed extended far beyond immediate crisis management. Shadow's herd had demonstrated that wild horses possessed sophisticated healthcare knowledge and the ability to organize complex community responses to medical emergencies. This revelation would soon influence approaches to wildlife veterinary care and our understanding of animal social structures. As autumn deepened in the Nevada desert, a startling new behavior emerged that would force researchers to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about wild horse intelligence. Shadow's herd began exhibiting what appeared to be deliberate environmental engineering, actively modifying their habitat in ways that would benefit not just themselves, but the entire desert ecosystem. Dr. Martinez's team first noticed this phenomenon when tracking the herd's grazing patterns. Instead of random foraging, Shadow was leading organized maintenance sweeps through their territory. The horses would systematically clear invasive plants while leaving native species untouched, effectively restoring the natural balance of the desert vegetation. This selective grazing demonstrated an understanding of plant ecology that went far beyond basic survival instincts. Dr. Samuel Richardson, a desert ecology specialist, documented how these grazing patterns were creating what he termed micro-oases, small areas of intensely managed vegetation that provided shelter and sustenance for various desert wildlife. The horses would carefully maintain these spaces, using their hooves to aerate the soil and their grazing patterns to promote plant diversity. Even more remarkably, they were teaching these techniques to other herds. The most fascinating aspect of this behavior was Shadow's apparent role as the architect of these environmental modifications. Her domestic background seemed to give her unique insights into how selective pressure could influence plant growth. She had combined this knowledge with wild horse instincts to create a new approach to habitat management that was both sophisticated and sustainable. The research team was particularly intrigued by the herd's water management techniques. The horses had begun creating small depressions in the desert soil that would collect and retain rainwater, effectively establishing new water sources for the entire ecosystem. These horse-made water features soon became gathering points for various desert species, from birds to small mammals. Using drone footage and satellite imaging, researchers mapped these modified areas and discovered they formed a complex network of wildlife corridors throughout the territory. Shadow's herd had essentially created a series of connected habitats that allowed different species to move safely through the landscape while accessing necessary resources. This level of environmental engineering had profound implications for understanding animal intelligence and ecological management. Dr. Lisa Wong, a specialist in animal cognition, began studying the teaching methods used to pass on these environmental modification skills. She observed that Shadow's herd had developed a sophisticated apprenticeship system where younger horses would work alongside experienced ones to learn the precise techniques needed for effective habitat management. This structured learning approach suggested levels of social organization previously unknown in wild horse societies. The impact of these activities extended beyond the immediate area. Other wild herds began adopting these practices, creating a ripple effect of environmental improvement across the region. Satellite imagery revealed visible changes in vegetation patterns and soil health in areas where these techniques had been implemented, providing concrete evidence of the horse's positive impact on the desert ecosystem. Jimmy Red Cloud contributed valuable historical context, sharing traditional stories about how wild horses had once been known as keepers of the land. These ancient tales described horses as conscious stewards of their environment, actively maintaining the health of the ecosystems they inhabited. Shadow's herd appeared to be rediscovering and implementing these ancient practices. As fall progressed, the scientific community began to recognize that they were witnessing something unprecedented, a wild animal population deliberately and systematically improving their habitat for the benefit of multiple species. This revelation challenged conventional views about animal intelligence and raised important questions about the role of wild horses in ecosystem management. The late autumn brought an unexpected development that would showcase the full extent of Shadow's influence on wild horse society. A group of young horses from her herd began exhibiting behaviors that suggested they were not just learning from her teachings, but actively innovating upon them. This generational evolution of knowledge would challenge fundamental assumptions about animal learning and cultural transmission. Dr. Martinez's team observed as these younger horses, dubbed the second-generation innovators, began combining different elements of Shadow's teachings in novel ways. They merged the healing circle techniques with the environmental engineering practices, creating what researchers termed therapeutic landscapes, specially modified areas of terrain that served both healing and ecological purposes. The sophistication of these innovations caught the attention of Dr. Michael Chen, a specialist in animal social learning. Using advanced behavioral mapping technology, he documented how these young horses were taking Shadow's basic principles and developing them into more complex systems. They had created a network of specialized zones throughout their territory, each designed for specific purposes, from healing and teaching areas to nursery spaces for expecting mares. Perhaps most remarkable was the way these innovations spread through the horse population. The young innovators had developed their own methods of knowledge transmission, building upon Shadow's communication system to create what amounted to a formalized teaching network. Different horses would specialize in different aspects of the community's knowledge, creating what researchers described as the first observed instance of task specialization in wild horse societies. Dr. Rachel Anderson, an expert in animal intelligence, noted something extraordinary in the way these young horses approached problem-solving. They displayed clear evidence of abstract thinking, appearing to mentally model solutions before implementing them. This cognitive ability had never been documented in wild horses and suggested levels of intelligence that rivaled those of dolphins and great apes. The research team was particularly fascinated by how these second-generation innovations maintained connections to Shadow's original teachings while pushing into new territory. The young horses had preserved the core principles of healing and environmental stewardship, but had developed more efficient methods of implementing them. This demonstrated not just the ability to learn, but to critically evaluate and improve upon learned behaviors. Jimmy Red Cloud recognized in these developments the fulfillment of ancient prophecies that spoke of horses becoming teachers of teachers. The young innovators were proving that wild horse culture could evolve and adapt while maintaining its essential connection to ancient wisdom. Their achievements were bridging the gap between traditional knowledge and modern scientific understanding. In unexpected ways, the impact of these developments extended beyond the immediate horse community. Wildlife biologists began documenting changes in other species' behaviors in response to the horse's innovations. Local bird populations had started using the horse's therapeutic landscapes for nesting, while desert mammals were adopting the horse's water management techniques. The young innovators had essentially created a multi-species learning network. Dr. Martinez's team also observed how these developments were influencing Shadow herself. Rather than maintaining strict control over her herd's activities, she had adapted to a role more akin to a senior advisor, allowing the young innovators to experiment while providing guidance when needed. This flexible leadership style demonstrated sophisticated social dynamics previously unknown in wild horse societies. As the season progressed, the implications of these developments began to reshape scientific understanding of animal intelligence and cultural evolution. Shadow's legacy had evolved beyond her immediate innovations to spark a self-sustaining cycle of learning and improvement in the wild horse community. This revelation would soon influence approaches to wildlife conservation and our understanding of animal society's capacity for cultural development. As winter approached, once again, an extraordinary series of events would reveal the true scope of Shadow's influence on wild horse society. The research team discovered that her impact had extended far beyond their initial study area, creating what they termed a network of knowledge that spanned hundreds of miles across the Nevada desert. Dr. Martinez's team began receiving reports from other researchers and wildlife observers about horse herds exhibiting similar behaviors in distant locations. These groups, while never having direct contact with Shadow's herd, had somehow adopted variations of her healing circles, environmental engineering techniques, and communication systems. This phenomenon of knowledge transmission across vast distances challenged existing theories about how information spreads through wild animal populations. Using satellite tracking and drone surveillance, Dr. James Wilson mapped out what appeared to be a complex network of inter-herd connections. The data revealed that Shadow's innovations had sparked a kind of cultural revolution among wild horses, with different groups adapting and modifying her techniques to suit their specific environments. Each herd had developed its own unique variations, while maintaining the core principles of her teachings. The most fascinating aspect of this spread was the way different herds had specialized in different aspects of Shadow's knowledge. Some groups had become experts in healing techniques, while others excelled at environmental engineering or communication. This specialization had led to the emergence of what researchers termed cultural trading zones, areas where different herds would gather to exchange knowledge and techniques. Dr. Elena Kovacs, a specialist in animal social networks, documented how these exchanges followed sophisticated patterns of interaction. Herds would send ambassador horses to learn from other groups, then return to teach new techniques to their own bands. This level of organized knowledge sharing had never been observed in wild animal populations and suggested a degree of social complexity that rivaled human learning networks. Perhaps most remarkably, these knowledge exchanges had begun influencing other species. Researchers observed how certain bird populations had started following the horse herd's migration patterns, learning to identify healing plants and water sources through the horse's behavior. Even large predators had adjusted their hunting patterns in response to the new horse social structures, creating a more balanced ecosystem. The research team was particularly intrigued by the way Shadow's original innovations had evolved as they spread. Each new herd added its own modifications and improvements, creating what amounted to a continuous cycle of innovation. Dr. Martinez likened it to an open-source technology system where each group could build upon and improve the basic framework while maintaining its essential functions. Jimmy Red Cloud's traditional knowledge once again provided crucial context. He shared ancient stories about how horses had once served as messengers between different animal nations, helping to maintain balance in the natural world. Shadow's network seemed to be reviving this ancient role, creating connections not just between horse herds, but between different species and ecosystems. The implications of these discoveries extended far beyond wildlife biology. The emergence of this sophisticated knowledge-sharing network challenged fundamental assumptions about animal intelligence and social organization. It suggested that wild animals were capable of creating and maintaining complex cultural systems that could adapt and evolve over time and distance. As winter settled over the desert, the research team began to understand that they were witnessing not just the spread of specific behaviors, but the emergence of a new kind of wild horse society. Shadow's initial innovations had sparked a self-sustaining cycle of learning and adaptation that was transforming the entire ecosystem. This revelation would soon influence approaches to wildlife conservation and our understanding of animal cultural evolution. The depths of winter brought an unexpected discovery that would revolutionize our understanding of how wild horses perceive and interact with their environment. Through advanced sensing equipment, Dr. Martinez's team detected that Shadow's herd was responding to subtle electromagnetic fields in the desert landscape, a capability that explained many of their seemingly mysterious behaviors. Dr. Sarah Chen, a biophysicist specializing in animal sensory systems, discovered that the horses were able to detect minute changes in the Earth's magnetic field, particularly around underground water sources and geological formations. This ability had become more refined under Shadow's influence as she combined her domestic experience of human water-finding methods with the herd's natural sensory capabilities. The most remarkable aspect of this discovery was how the herd had developed a systematic way of mapping these electromagnetic patterns. Researchers observed as horses would take turns standing in specific formations, appearing to triangulate, and memorize the electromagnetic signatures of their territory. This collaborative mapping behavior demonstrated levels of spatial awareness and cooperative learning previously unknown in any animal species. The research team was particularly fascinated by how Shadow had taught the herd to integrate this natural sensing ability with their existing knowledge systems. The horses would use their electromagnetic sensitivity to identify optimal locations for their healing circles, choosing spots where the Earth's natural energy fields were strongest. These locations, when analyzed, showed unique geological properties that could enhance the therapeutic effects of their healing practices. Dr. Marcus Wong, an expert in animal neuroscience, began studying how the horses' brains processed these electromagnetic signals. Using portable EEG equipment, he documented unprecedented patterns of neural activity that suggested the horses were creating detailed mental maps of their environment's electromagnetic landscape. These maps were not just static representations, but were constantly updated and shared throughout the herd. The implications of these findings extended into unexpected areas of research. Geologists found that the horses' chosen locations often corresponded with significant underground features. Aquifers, mineral deposits, and fault lines that were previously unknown. Shadow's herd had effectively become living geological surveyors, their behavior revealing hidden aspects of the desert's structure. Jimmy Red Cloud shared that his ancestors had long believed horses possessed special connections to the Earth's energy fields. Traditional stories spoke of horses as being able to read the Earth's dreams, a poetic description that now seemed to have scientific validation. The convergence of indigenous knowledge and modern scientific discovery was creating new frameworks for understanding animal intelligence. Perhaps most significantly, the herd had begun teaching this sensitivity to other animals. Researchers observed young horses working with other species, particularly deer and antelope, showing them how to locate water sources using electromagnetic cues. This interspecies knowledge transfer suggested levels of animal communication and cooperation that challenged existing scientific paradigms. The research team documented how this enhanced sensitivity had improved the herd's survival strategies. They could predict weather changes by detecting shifts in atmospheric electromagnetic patterns, anticipate seismic activity by noting subtle changes in the Earth's field, and locate water sources with unprecedented accuracy. This combination of natural ability and learned behavior had created an early warning system that benefited the entire ecosystem. As winter progressed, the significance of these discoveries rippled through the scientific community. Shadow's herd had demonstrated that animals could not only perceive aspects of their environment invisible to human senses, but could systematically map and share this information across species boundaries. This revelation was forcing a fundamental reassessment of animal intelligence and their relationship with the natural world. Midwinter brought a series of extraordinary events that would reveal yet another dimension of Shadow's impact on wild horse society. The research team discovered that her herd had developed what appeared to be a sophisticated system of dream sharing, a phenomenon that would challenge the boundaries between science and the mystical traditions of the Native American elders. Dr. Martinez's team first noticed this behavior during the long winter nights, when the horses would gather in tight circular formations, unlike their usual sleeping arrangements. Using infrared cameras and advanced brainwave monitoring equipment, they recorded synchronized patterns of REM sleep among the gathered horses, suggesting a level of shared consciousness previously unknown in the animal kingdom. Doctor, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rebecca Thompson, a specialist in animal sleep patterns, documented how these communal dreaming sessions appeared to serve multiple purposes. The horses would emerge from these gatherings with new behavioral patterns and solutions to environmental challenges they hadn't yet encountered. It was as if they were using their shared dream state to simulate and prepare for future scenarios. The most fascinating aspect of this discovery was Shadow's role in facilitating these dream-sharing circles. Her position between the domestic and wild worlds seemed to give her unique abilities to bridge different states of consciousness. Researchers observed how she would guide younger horses into these shared dream states, teaching them to access what Jimmy Red Cloud's people had long called the spirit trails, ancient pathways of knowledge passed down through generations. Using advanced EEG equipment modified for wild conditions, Dr. James Chen recorded unprecedented levels of neural synchronization during these sessions. The horses' brainwaves would align in patterns that suggested they were experiencing shared visual and emotional experiences. Even more remarkably, these patterns would sometimes extend to other species resting nearby, indicating a form of interspecies consciousness sharing. The research team was particularly intrigued by how these dream-sharing sessions influenced the herd's daily behavior. Horses would emerge from these gatherings with new knowledge about weather patterns, migration routes, and healing techniques that they couldn't have learned through conventional means. It was as if they were accessing a collective wisdom that transcended individual experience. Jimmy Red Cloud recognized in these sessions the fulfillment of ancient prophecies about horses returning to their role as dream keepers of the natural world. His people's traditions had long spoken of horses as beings capable of traveling between the physical and spirit worlds, carrying messages and knowledge that would help maintain the balance of nature. The impact of these dream-sharing sessions extended beyond immediate knowledge transfer. Researchers observed how the shared experiences strengthened social bonds within the herd and enhanced their ability to coordinate complex behaviors. The horses would emerge from these gatherings with heightened awareness of each other's needs and improved capability for collective decision-making. Dr. Lisa Wong, studying the long-term effects of these sessions, noted how they influenced the herd's problem-solving abilities. The horses began displaying anticipatory behaviors that suggested they were not just reacting to their environment, but actively preparing for future challenges. This level of foresight and planning had never been documented in wild animal populations. As winter deepened, the implications of these discoveries began to reshape scientific understanding of animal consciousness. Shadow's herd had demonstrated that animals were capable of forms of knowledge sharing and collective experience that transcended conventional understanding of learning and communication. This revelation would soon influence approaches to studying animal intelligence and the nature of consciousness itself. As winter reached its peak, Shadow's herd revealed a phenomenon that would bridge the gap between scientific observation and ancient wisdom. The research team discovered that the horses had developed what appeared to be a sophisticated system of sound healing, using specific frequencies of vocalization to promote physical and emotional healing across species. Dr. Martinez's team first detected this development through their advanced audio recording equipment, which captured previously unnoticed patterns in the horses' vocalizations during their healing circles. These sounds occurred at specific frequencies that, when analyzed, showed remarkable similarities to those used in traditional sound healing practices across various cultures. Dr. Maria Santos, an expert in bioacoustics, documented how the horses were producing intricate layered vocalizations that created complex harmonic patterns. These sounds weren't random. They appeared to be carefully structured, with different frequencies used for different types of healing. Even more remarkably, the horses were teaching these techniques to their young, creating what amounted to an oral tradition of sound healing. The most fascinating aspect was how Shadow had integrated her domestic experience with the wild horse's natural abilities. Her understanding of human vocal cues had somehow enhanced the herd's capacity to produce these healing frequencies. The result was a hybrid system of sound therapy that combined the precision of domestic horse communication with the raw power of wild horse vocalizations. Using specialized vibration sensors, the research team discovered that these sound patterns had measurable effects on living organisms. The frequencies produced during healing sessions could influence heart rates, reduce inflammation, and even promote cellular repair. These effects weren't limited to horses. Other animals in the vicinity, from small mammals to birds, showed positive physiological responses to the healing sounds. Jimmy Red Cloud shared that his ancestors had long known of horses' ability to sing the earth's medicine. The sound healing sessions observed in Shadow's herd aligned perfectly with traditional stories of horses as sacred healers who could use their voices to restore balance to the natural world. Once again, ancient wisdom and modern science were finding common ground. The research team was particularly intrigued by how these sound healing techniques were being transmitted between herds. Other wild horse groups began adopting these practices, but with interesting variations. Each herd developed its own dialect of healing sounds, adapted to their specific environmental conditions and the needs of their local ecosystem. Dr. Thomas Chen, a specialist in animal communication, observed how the horses were using these sound patterns not just for healing, but as a form of environmental regulation. The frequencies they produced seemed to influence plant growth, soil bacterial activity, and even water crystallization patterns. The herd had essentially become sound engineers of their ecosystem. Perhaps most remarkably, the horses began teaching these sound healing techniques to other species. Researchers documented instances of wild horses working with wolves, deer, and even birds, showing them how to produce therapeutic frequencies. This cross-species transmission of healing knowledge suggested levels of animal intelligence and cooperation previously unimaginable. As winter's grip tightened, the implications of these discoveries continued to expand. Shadow's herd had demonstrated that animals could develop and transmit sophisticated healing technologies that operated on principles modern science was only beginning to understand. This revelation was forcing a fundamental reassessment of animal intelligence and their role in maintaining ecosystem health. As late winter gave way to the first hints of spring, Shadow's herd made a discovery that would revolutionize our understanding of animal memory and generational knowledge. The research team observed as the horses began accessing what appeared to be a form of ancestral memory, tapping into knowledge that had been dormant in their species for centuries. The breakthrough came during a series of unusual behavior patterns that Dr. Martinez's team noticed during the changing of seasons. The herd began performing complex rituals that exactly matched behaviors described in historical accounts from hundreds of years ago, behaviors that had never been observed in modern wild horses. These weren't learned activities. They were emerging spontaneously, as if awakened from some deep genetic memory. Dr. Rachel Anderson, a specialist in evolutionary biology, documented how these recovered memories manifested in practical ways. The horses began using migration routes that hadn't been used for centuries, finding water sources that had been lost to human knowledge, and demonstrating knowledge of plant uses that aligned perfectly with ancient Native American records. Shadow's unique position between domestic and wild worlds seemed to have somehow activated this dormant knowledge. The most remarkable aspect was how this ancestral memory was being integrated with modern adaptations. The herd wasn't simply recreating ancient behaviors. They were updating them for the current environment, combining old wisdom with new solutions. This synthesis of ancient and modern knowledge demonstrated a level of cognitive sophistication that challenged existing theories about animal intelligence. Using advanced genetic sequencing techniques, Dr. James Wong discovered that these behavioral changes corresponded with the activation of dormant genetic sequences. Something in Shadow's hybrid experience had triggered these ancient genetic memories, allowing the herd to access what amounted to a biological database of their species' accumulated wisdom. Jimmy Red Cloud wasn't surprised by these findings. His people's traditions had always maintained that horses carried the memories of their ancestors in their blood, and that these memories could be awakened under the right circumstances. The scientific validation of these traditional beliefs was creating new bridges between indigenous knowledge and modern research. The research team was particularly fascinated by how this ancestral knowledge was being transmitted to other species. The horses began teaching other animals about ancient migration routes, forgotten water sources, and lost feeding grounds. This interspecies knowledge transfer was creating what amounted to a revival of ancient ecosystem patterns. Dr. Elena Martinez documented how this recovered knowledge was influencing the herd's healing practices. The horses began incorporating ancient movement patterns into their healing circles, creating what appeared to be a form of ritualized physical therapy that combined ancestral wisdom with their modern understanding of body mechanics. The effectiveness of these techniques was drawing attention from veterinary researchers worldwide. Perhaps most significantly, the awakening of these ancestral memories seemed to be spreading beyond Shadow's immediate herd. Other wild horse groups began showing signs of accessing similar knowledge, suggesting that once activated, these dormant memories could be transmitted between populations. This phenomenon was creating what researchers termed a memory renaissance among wild horses. As the season turned, the implications of these discoveries continued to expand. Shadow's herd had demonstrated that animals possessed deep reservoirs of ancestral knowledge that could be accessed and updated for modern conditions. This revelation was forcing a fundamental reassessment of how we understand animal cognition and the nature of inherited knowledge. As early spring brought new life to the Nevada desert, Shadow's story took an unexpected turn that would reveal the true magnitude of her influence on the natural world. The research team discovered that the changes she had initiated weren't just affecting individual animals or species. They were fundamentally altering the desert's ecological patterns in ways that would restore ancient balanced relationships between all living things. Dr. Martinez's team began noticing subtle but significant changes in the desert landscape. Areas where Shadow's herd had implemented their environmental engineering techniques were showing signs of ecological resurrection. Plant species that hadn't been seen in the region for decades were spontaneously emerging, their dormant seeds awakened by the horses' activities. The desert was literally coming back to life in ways that defied conventional ecological understanding. Dr. Sarah Thompson, an expert in ecosystem restoration, documented how these changes were creating a cascade effect throughout the food web. The re-emergence of native plants attracted insects that had long disappeared from the region, which in turn brought back bird species that hadn't been seen in generations. Shadow's herd had inadvertently triggered what ecologists termed a restoration cascade, a self-reinforcing cycle of ecosystem recovery. The most fascinating aspect of this transformation was its connection to the herd's recovered ancestral memories. The patterns of restoration exactly matched historical descriptions of the desert's ecosystem from centuries ago, suggesting that the horses were unconsciously recreating ancient environmental conditions through their renewed knowledge of the land. Using satellite imagery and advanced environmental sensors, the research team mapped how these changes were spreading beyond the herd's immediate territory. Other areas of the desert were beginning to show similar signs of renewal, as if the land itself was remembering its ancient patterns of life. The horses had become catalysts for a grand-scale ecological awakening. Jimmy Red Cloud shared ancient prophecies that spoke of a time when the horses would wake the sleeping earth. These traditional stories described exactly what the scientists were now observing, a fundamental restoration of natural balance initiated by the horses' renewed connection to their ancestral wisdom. Once again, indigenous knowledge was providing crucial context for understanding these unprecedented changes. The research team was particularly intrigued by how this ecological transformation was influencing human-wildlife relationships. Local ranchers reported that their domestic horses were beginning to exhibit some of the behaviors they had observed in Shadow's herd. The boundary between wild and domestic was becoming increasingly fluid, suggesting a deeper reconnection between all horses and their ancestral nature. Dr. Michael Chen, studying the broader implications of these changes, noted how the restoration process was creating new opportunities for human-wildlife cooperation. The recovered ecosystem was more resilient, more productive, and better able to support both wild and domestic animals. Shadow's influence had extended beyond wild horse society to reshape the very foundation of desert ecology. Perhaps most remarkably, these changes were beginning to influence climate patterns in the region. The restored vegetation was increasing moisture retention and reducing ground temperatures, creating microclimate changes that improved conditions for all desert life. Shadow's herd had initiated what amounted to a natural climate restoration process. As spring continued to unfold, the significance of these discoveries deepened. Shadow's story had evolved from a tale of individual survival to become a blueprint for ecosystem restoration. Her journey from abandoned domestic horse to catalyst of ecological renaissance was demonstrating how nature's wisdom, once awakened, could heal not just individual creatures, but entire landscapes. As spring fully emerged in the Nevada desert, A remarkable event would bring Shadow's story full circle and reveal its deepest significance. The research team witnessed what they could only describe as a graduation ceremony, a complex ritual that marked the complete transformation of Shadow's role from student to teacher, from survivor to sage. The ceremony began during a precise alignment of astronomical conditions that Jimmy Red Cloud's people had long associated with times of great transformation. Shadow's herd gathered in an unprecedented formation, creating concentric circles that mirrored ancient petroglyphs found in nearby cave systems. What followed would challenge every assumption about animal consciousness and social organization. Dr. Martinez and her team observed as Shadow conducted a series of intricate demonstrations, systematically sharing every aspect of knowledge she had gained since her abandonment. Through a combination of movement, sound, and energy work, she appeared to be formally passing on her complete understanding of healing, environmental stewardship, and interspecies communication to the next generation of leaders within the herd. The most extraordinary aspect of this knowledge transfer was its comprehensive nature. Using advanced monitoring equipment, researchers documented how Shadow was combining all the elements she had mastered, from electromagnetic sensitivity and sound healing to ancestral memory access and dream sharing. She was creating what amounted to a complete curriculum of wild horse wisdom, updated and enhanced by her unique domestic wild perspective. Dr. Rachel Wong, specializing in animal social structures, noted how this ceremony marked a fundamental shift in the herd's organization. Young horses that had been under Shadow's tutelage were now stepping into leadership roles, each specializing in different aspects of the collective knowledge. This transition demonstrated a level of social sophistication previously unknown in any animal society. The research team was particularly fascinated by how this ceremony influenced the broader ecosystem. Other species gathered to witness the event, from birds circling overhead to coyotes watching from a respectful distance. The entire desert community seemed to recognize the significance of this transition, suggesting levels of interspecies awareness that science was only beginning to understand. Jimmy Red Cloud shared that his ancestors had prophesied this moment, when a bridge horse would arise to reconnect domestic and wild knowledge, leading to a renewal of ancient partnerships between all living beings. Shadow's ceremony was fulfilling this prophecy, creating new possibilities for harmony between human and natural worlds. Perhaps most significantly, Tom Reynolds, Shadow's former owner, was permitted to observe the ceremony from afar. His presence seemed to complete a cycle of transformation, from the man who had abandoned a sick horse to a witness of her emergence as a teacher of ancient wisdom. This reconciliation suggested possibilities for healing the rift between domestic and wild that Shadow's story had always represented. The ceremony concluded with what researchers termed a knowledge spiral, a dynamic pattern of movement and energy that rippled through the assembled horses and out into the desert landscape. Sensors recorded unprecedented levels of coherent energy emanating from the gathering, suggesting that the ceremony was having measurable effects on the physical environment. As spring sunlight bathed the desert in golden hues, the significance of what they had witnessed began to sink in. Shadow's journey had not just been about personal survival or even species adaptation. It had been about restoring ancient patterns of relationship between all living things. Her ceremony marked not an ending, but a new beginning in the ongoing story of life's evolution. 1 year after Shadow was abandoned in the Nevada desert, the transformation she initiated had grown far beyond what anyone could have imagined. As Dr. Martinez's team prepared their final research papers, the implications of Shadow's journey were reverberating through scientific communities worldwide and reshaping our understanding of the relationship between domestic and wild animals. The most profound impact could be seen in the desert itself. The territory where Shadow's herd roamed had become what researchers termed a living laboratory of ecological restoration. The barren landscape had transformed into a thriving ecosystem, with natural springs reappearing, native plants flourishing, and wildlife returning in numbers not seen for generations. Shadow's integration of domestic and wild knowledge had created a blueprint for environmental regeneration that was being studied and replicated across different ecosystems. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dr. James Chen's long-term study revealed that the changes initiated by Shadow had become self-sustaining. The network of knowledge she helped establish continued to evolve and adapt, with new generations of horses building upon her innovations. The dream-sharing circles, healing ceremonies, and environmental engineering techniques she introduced had become integral parts of wild horse culture, spreading far beyond her original herd. Perhaps most remarkably, Shadow's influence had begun to transform the relationship between wild and domestic horses. Ranchers across the region reported that their domestic horses were showing increased awareness and intelligence, as if Shadow's awakening of ancestral memories had triggered a broader renaissance in equine consciousness. The boundary between domestic and wild was becoming less rigid, suggesting new possibilities for harmony between human and natural worlds. Jimmy Red Cloud's people had begun working with wildlife biologists to document the parallels between Shadow's teachings and their traditional knowledge. This collaboration was creating new frameworks for understanding animal intelligence that bridged the gap between indigenous wisdom and modern science. Shadow's story had become a catalyst for reconciliation between different ways of knowing the natural world. The research team observed how Shadow's legacy continued to influence the broader ecosystem. Other species had adopted and adapted her innovations, creating what amounted to a multi-species network of environmental stewardship. The desert had become a model for how different species could cooperate to maintain ecological balance, challenging conventional views about competition in nature. Tom Reynolds, whose initial act of abandonment had set this extraordinary story in motion, had become an advocate for wild horse preservation. His testimony about Shadow's transformation was helping to change public perception of wild horses, from problematic invasive species to essential partners in ecosystem restoration. His journey of redemption paralleled the larger story of humanity's potential to move from exploitation to cooperation with the natural world. Dr. Martinez's final analysis suggested that Shadow's story represented more than just an extraordinary case of animal adaptation. It demonstrated the potential for healing the rift between domestic and wild, between human knowledge and natural wisdom. Shadow had shown that these apparent opposites could be integrated to create new possibilities for ecological harmony. As spring turned to summer, Shadow's herd continued their work of renewal in the Nevada desert. The abandoned domestic horse had become something unprecedented, a bridge between worlds, a teacher of ancient wisdom and a catalyst for ecological awakening. Her story offered hope that even in the face of environmental crisis, nature's capacity for regeneration and renewal remained strong. The final monitoring data showed that the changes Shadow initiated had reached a critical mass, becoming self-perpetuating and continuing to evolve. She had sparked what scientists termed a restoration cascade that would continue long after the research project ended. In abandoning her to an apparent death sentence, humans had unknowingly set in motion a process of renewal that would help ensure life's flourishing for generations to come. Up next, you got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.